Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and welcome back to the Division Resurgence. That's right, we're here. If you didn't know this existed, this is the Division's mobile spin-off title. It was announced all the way back in 2022. At that point, it went through a series of public and private playtests. That all led up to their largest scale test that was done back in December of 2023, but that was 21 months ago, as is indicated by the video title. There have been a light few rumbles since then, a tiny private playtest or two, but right now, in September of 2025, is the first time that the game has really resurfaced in any kind of a public way in nearly 2 years. The game is still not out officially, let me be clear, this is an early access test that you are watching. Before you ask, no, I unfortunately cannot get you a code to get in on this one. I was generously offered one by the team, but this current test is primarily targeted at the Romanian player base and region. Entry to it is only permitted by sign up and then they send you an invite. Now they have confirmed that more wider availability tests are coming up. The way to get into that invite pool is to sign up on their website, which I will have linked right at the top of the description. So I just wanted to start off by recapping all of that, but why am I really making this video? Well, given that the general consensus was that the game was pretty much good to go after that last beta in 2023, and then they went dark for nearly 2 years, that's something I want to talk about. I also wanted to discuss a few of my findings from this new test and talk about what has changed in the past 21 months, and also talk about how since then we've seen titles like Destiny Rising release, and I think the perception on this genre overall has shifted, even if just a small bit. So yeah, should be an interesting discussion overall. As we jump in, major shout out and thank you to our channel members. Your support lets me continue covering and existing in this franchise and community that I love so much, so thank you for that. But yeah, without further ado, let's get to it. So let us begin with this current playtest itself, shall we? Funny enough, and I know it might be a shock to hear this, but the game is pretty much exactly the same as it was 21 months ago. I know, you're like, how is that possible? But they did confirm this themselves in the announcement for this test, that this build would be pretty much identical. They did also go out and confirm that the objective for this test is to get data and stress test backend and infrastructure changes that have been made to the game. So that's all well and good. What's not clear right now is what comes next, right? Do they plan to test these backend changes, then throw a bunch of new content and changes into the game that have been made in the past 2 years and test that in a new iteration? I would say to me that feels like it would be an odd approach. You would think that something like this current test then would be NDA'd, and then for the first public reappearance of the game, you would have a fresh coat of paint, a ton of new features and content and all of that. We'll see. For now, I will give them the benefit of the doubt that we don't yet have the full picture on what has been worked on in the past 2 years and what may be coming. There are a handful of things I've noticed this time around that seem to be a bit different, you know, in my best attempts to recall what was here 2 years ago. That is a very long time. Again, from what I can recall, performance does seem to have been optimized. This gameplay you're watching is running on an iPhone 15 Pro, and I'm getting buttery smooth 60 FPS by turning my FPS slider to the max, and then my graphics are set at medium. Now, don't get me wrong, it ran surprisingly well last time the game was here, but I seem to recall that there were some stutters, maybe some frame drops when entering different regions, you know, traveling into the open world versus going into a mission. With my time in this test so far, whether it is in a safe area, in the open world, in the dark zone, it's just a consistent 60, which is really nice. There seems to be a much more robust matchmaking system in place here. There's a lot better UI and more centralized UI to find groups for pretty much any content that you want to do. And at least my perception is, again, it could just be that I haven't played this game in 2 years, but the controls and responsiveness of the game feel like they've been tightened up. I have played the entirety of my time with this test on a controller. I'm just not somebody who's going to go and use the touchscreen. But for the most part, that is about it in terms of what I've been able to pick up on. Stuff like the game's tutorial, the story, the overall content, game modes, all of that. It's all the same. And I will say, some of those areas are where I was really hoping to see some real refinement and improvement given, you know, how long it's been since we last saw the game. And once again, maybe this is still coming. They haven't really detailed yet what went on in that period or what's changing. But I know in particular that story is one area that I was really hoping might see some major reform. Look, game design wise, it is still miraculous how much they have pulled off in a mobile game. Much like Destiny Rising, which we're going to discuss in a moment, a lot of the features that are present here in Resurgence are ones that we have wanted in the mainline Division games for a long time. This game really seems to have a much greater MMO influence in its design. Stuff like seeing other agents out in the open world, There are things like clan bases, there was a recommended builds feature to help newer players acclimate, but with all of that being said, story is the one area that I always felt has been kind of off for this game. It's a subjective topic, for sure, but for me, tonally, it can feel quite goofy. I think the overall setting and timeline for this game is great. It's set in between the events of the Division 1 and 2, but on the same Division 1 map that we know and love, so you get to see some of the progression of time since we played the Division 1. You get a lot greater context on some of these events. You get to go back and interact with characters like Fei Lao and so many other beloved ones. But despite all of that, the dialogue that you get in between, particularly with the newer characters, can be quite cheesy. I've just never jived with the story personally, and I think that feedback was pretty largely there back when the game was more in the spotlight back in 2022-23. As I said though, so far that all remains unchanged like most of the rest of the game. Those are just my own personal nitpicks. However, more broadly, I do think it says something that a mobile game announced 3 years ago still has as much anticipation and interest behind it as Resurgence does. Of course, being tied to a recognizable IP like The Division helps, but as noted, this game has done a lot to earn its name and keep. It's a faithful adaptation of the Division games on mobile. It's pretty groundbreaking in terms of the technological features that they've been able to reformat and put into mobile. I know I've mentioned it a few times already, but I really do want to discuss some of the parallels we're seeing here to Destiny Rising, which just released last month. Looking beyond just the Division and Destiny comparisons that have always existed out there, Rising and Resurgence, which, now that I think about it, those are quite similar names. That's funny. But the two games have a lot of similar objectives, right? They are taking these beloved IPs and games, providing that experience authentically on mobile. They streamline a few things here, innovate a few things there. They, appropriately pump up the cash shop for the mobile platform standard. But I think that Destiny Rising's release here recently gives us a pretty decent look at the possibility of what could await a successful Resurgence launch if all things go smoothly. Because look, the argument has existed since Resurgence's first announcement. There are a lot of people out there who think that this project is a waste of resources, they think no one's going to play it, etc. Keep in mind, however, and I know I've said this plenty of times before when talking about this game, if you're looking worldwide and not just in the ecosystem that we're familiar with for gaming, mobile gaming on a global scale is the largest platform for gaming by like several times over. It does tend to be more popular in the East, although it does seem to be becoming a bit more mainstream in the West too. And on that note, one of the only updates that we got from the game after that December 2023 test was that distribution had been approved for Resurgence in China. I think it's very possible that that could have played a big role in this 21-month gap that we've seen. That is very much a key market to try and capitalize on for a big AAA, if you can call it that, mobile game. Shifting back to Destiny Rising though, I try and keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in the Destiny community. I used to play that game years ago. I just like knowing what's going on. And from what I've seen, that community shared many similar concerns for Rising. They thought it was a waste of resources. They thought, who's gonna play this if it's only on mobile? Well, just ahead of its launch, which happened last month, the devs had confirmed that they'd reached 10 million pre-registrations. I mean, that's wild. Now, I do think that part of the surge of interest in the game particularly came from the existing Destiny community, all thanks to the timing of when Rising released. Things are quite turbulent in Destiny 2 at the moment, and I think a lot of players were looking for another outlet to put their interest in, so that played a part. But to be fair, all of that would have crumbled if Destiny Rising was a bad game, right? But it's launched, and while we have no quantitative data to look at yet for player counts or revenue or any of that, the sentiment around the game seems to be really good. Things seem like they're flourishing. There's already updates rolling out. I know they did a raid race recently. My point is this: in Resurgence's absence, we've now seen proof that this exact kind of model can work. It has for Destiny and Destiny Rising. So even though I may not agree with every creative decision that they've made for Resurgence, and I'm still quite a bit perplexed as to what exactly they've been working on for the past 21 months, I do believe that there is a path to success for this game. And success with Resurgence, although it's not a one-to-one, that does overall still mean success for the Division brand, which in my opinion, we want as much as possible heading towards the eventual release of the Division 3. There's that, and, the game's just pretty fun. Am I going to play this as much as I played The Division 2? No, but I'll give it this. It is impressive that a mobile game can hold my attention like Resurgence does, and given it's got the Dark Zone and Conflict, which is what I play the most on The Division 2 anyway, that's certainly a draw. If they plan to support and update it more than Division 2 has been doing, that's a big reason for me to jump on. As I've said ever since they announced this thing, pretty much, I think Resurgence does absolutely have a place within this Division universe and ecosystem. I'm glad to see that it's finally back, that they're talking about it, and I'm quite curious to see where they take things from here. Well, my friends, I think that is just about everything I've got. Really, I just wanted to do a temperature check on Resurgence with this latest test. You know, it had been a long time since we talked about it, so good to be back, good to be chatting. At this point, though, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on just about anything that we covered in this video. Maybe this is one of the first times that you're hearing or seeing of Resurgence to begin with. If so, what do you think about this game's proposition overall, its existence? If you've been following the saga, what do you think about the lapse in updates that we had for the project? What do you think about its chances for success now that we have the context of Destiny Rising's release? And overall, how do you think they should handle the road to launch? Because from their words, it should be coming up in the not too far future. Whatever you've got, let me know. Can't wait to read through it. That is just about everything from me, though. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you back soon. RogueGold out.